And I want to thank the students of Calgary, staff, faculty, and the community members who are joining us. And also Dr. Melinda Smith, your Vice Provost for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Dr. Virginia Tomas, the Vice Dean for Faculty of Arts. So thank you so much for even thinking of having me join you today. When Ebenezer told me the topic, I was so excited to be able to share this with you. And I want to start by saying I have a special guest here too, someone I've known for, I'm not going to say how many years because then you'll know how old I am, but what the heck, for over 50 years. And he was a wonderful colleague for mine, for me going through my education and helped me in extraordinary ways. He is Dr. Joseph Crumley, and he is a family therapist, and he works with kinship care out of the University of Pennsylvania, is where he's got his doctorate degree. And so we're all Philadelphia. I'm originally from Philadelphia, so we're all Philadelphia friends. And so he's on the call today, and I really appreciate him taking time for that, to do that. And hopefully he'll get involved in our question and answer period, because he's very knowledgeable. He was always the smart friend you had. That was him. So, and I have a group of students joining me too, because once Ebenezer said I could invite whoever I wanted, I really was excited and wanted to share this moment. And part of it was because we're talking to people in another country. And Canada has always been dear to my heart. I love visiting there. Haven't got over to Calgary yet, but I will. And now I'll make it a point to do that because everyone I've touched since we started this journey has just been so wonderful and so helpful. So let's talk about this word. Woo. Now, I want to share with you that this is an emotional topic for many. It's also an emotional topic for me, but I've done it so many times that I think I can have a balance in how I respond. And that's what I hope for everyone who's here today, that we will respect each other's opinion, especially when they differ from ours, that we will be similar and use kind words to express our opinions. And not, and oftentimes it's not what we say, but how we say it that's so important. So I wanna, okay, here we go. I wanna, what happened? It went back to my first slide. So I want to say that about that. And also to be open to ask if you don't know when you have hurt someone. And even though we're not, I usually do this in a workshop forum. And since, even though we're not doing a workshop, I still want to have a semblance of connection with you today. So anytime you're dealing with a sensitive topic, and I really look forward to the day when these aren't sensitive topics, but everyday topics for us to discuss, that you will be open to ask when you don't know, and if you feel that you've hurt someone, and be open to the process, because this learning is a process. And when we add emotions, it just becomes even more of a process. And we'd like you to chat how you feel presently about coming to a workshop such as this. So if I could ask you to take a moment in the chat to tell me, we're not going to do expectations and climate checks, so that will take too long with over 100 people. But what I would ask you to text for me very quickly are some of your fears and cheers about today. What were some of the things you were excited about? And then on the other side, what were some of the things you were maybe a little anxious about today and engaging in this topic? Would you take a moment and do that now? Are we getting any? I can't see it, Ebenezer.
I can read them out as they come.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So we have some people saying they're excited about learning. Some people are just excited to hear you, Dr. Hardy. Many people are excited in this dialogue. They're ready to develop stronger understandings. They're ready to learn something new. Some people have a fear of hurting people. Some people want to recognize the use of the N-word and its implications.
Mm, okay.
And many people just want to expand their opinion, learn about the history. So yeah, lots of interesting comments in the chat so far.
All right. And so we'll be sure to save that chat so that I can relish in it later. We're
For
back.
sure.
So thank you so much for participating in that. And it was really wonderful to hear some of those chats. And what I want to acknowledge and validate is that some of you said that it might be a little, you might be a little anxious and you wanted to make sure you didn't hurt anyone. And those are all very real concerns, because when we talk about this N word, there are three problems that are associated with this discussion. This 6-letter word that carries so much power with it. The three problems are racism, white privilege, and white fragility. Racism defined as the belief that one race is fundamentally superior to another. I love this graphic that I found because it says blood has just one color. White privilege. White privilege, this is where my notes would have really come in handy. White privilege is a set of social and economic advantages that white people have by virtue of their race and culture, or any dominant group has. I'm going to take this chat off so I can see my slide. And then we have this real sensitive issue called white fragility. And this is defined as a discomfort that some white people, a white person may have when they're confronted by information about racial inequities or injustices. And oftentimes, and I think Robin DiAngelo does a wonderful job of outlining the origin, cause, and also how we can manage or help our white friends manage their fragility. It's an excellent book. So let's look at the etymology of this word. Now, I am very careful when I do this type of workshop or speaking engagement because I don't like to hear the word at all. I treat it like profanity. And just like I don't want to hear 4-letter words, I also care not to hear the 6-letter word. But it does occur, and I survive. So you'll see that in most of the written form, I've blocked out most of the letters. So I will be using the N word, and I will also be using probably a word that also would be somewhat controversial that I'll tell you about when we get close to it, okay? So the N word is derived from the Latin word for color. And it's the Random House Historical Dictionary of American Slang says it did not originate as a slur, but took on a derogatory connotation later. And this is in Randall Kennedy's book entitled The N-Word, but he uses the word. And I disagree with him with this because it may have not been recognized by white society as a slur, but it surely developed as the slaves came off the ship. This word was attached to them, and it meant much more than just the color of their skin. So original English language spelled it without the 2 G's, and it was a word for a dark-skinned individual. And then, oops, this is why. I guess I should have given this over to you. I can't get my arrow. Why is it not there? This isn't fun. Okay. David Walker was a freedman of color and a very well-known activist in the late 1800s. And he wrote a famous manifesto, and he said that the word actually was Latin, but in ancient Latin, it was designated as inanimate. So therefore, it referred to animals. And you will hear in some of the slave writings in the literature that slaves were thought to be like animals. And it makes sense because if you have a Christian doctrine that you're operating under, which most slave owners did, as a Christian, you could not hold another human being in bondage. But if you saw them as less than human, that made it much more palatable. So I don't believe that it took that long to become a derogatory statement. So the earliest recorded use of the word was Negroes as a descriptor. The French, Spanish, and Portuguese would all sound similar in terms of the Negro sound. The word can be traced to the history of slavery. And the N-word was first written use that we know on the New World soil may have been in a diary of John Wolfe in 1619. He noted while he was noting the arrival of the first American African slaves in British North America. And he, on the manifest, they would write as the slaves came off, they would write, of course, they were they were stripped of their own names and their own language. So whoever was buying them, whatever plantation owner was buying them, would have, they'd have his name, and then in front of that, a name he assigned to them. So let's say John, his name was John Walsh. It might be Robert Walsh, but in front of the Robert was a word, the N-word, to designate that this was a Black person and a slave. So what about the power of this word? I hear this a lot in my classes. Why does the N-word have so much power? The story of the N-word in many ways parallels the overall story of race in America, from the bloody circumstances of its birth to the messy state it is in present. I don't think of this word as just a word. It's a tool, and it's used to bring history to the present day and hold it. This word is still visible anywhere there's racial conflict. The social media, the vast landscape of pop culture, the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, and most recently, January 6th, in Washington, D.C., when the assault happened on the Capitol. Non-white Capitol Police were flooded with the N-word as they defended our Capitol, and their lives were threatened. This word has been described by Kennedy in his book titled The N-word, but the real word. It has been described as a nuclear bomb of racial epithets, a word that whites have employed to wound and degrade African Americans for 3 centuries. 3 centuries. So I was curious to see how many times this word would come up. So I did an online search, and in less than a minute, I searched the number of publications with N-word in the title, and I got 2,600,000 hits. 2 million. When I searched for the number of songs with the N-word in the title, or the N-words in it, rather, there were 5,510,000 identified in less than a minute. So, of course, I wanted to know about the movies. In the movies, the hit came out 3,790 times. And when I added plays, it came up 5,880 times in less than a minute. So we're gonna see, well, as you can see in the number of times, if you do the same with another ethnic group, would you have the same numbers if you had a slur for an ethnic group? This slur continues to maintain itself throughout history. So I put this in because I discovered this when I was looking, and I was just so proud. It was the first novel by an African-American woman, and Louis Gates found it in 1981 and published it. And it's thought to be the first book published by an African-American woman. Now, the interesting thing is the name of the book. It's called RNIG, and you see right here, and it's autobiographical, and it was by Harriet Wilson. But the decision, she was a freed Negro working as a domestic. And the decision was made not to use her name in the title for fear that no one would read it. And so they called it R, and it was published. So you couldn't even count on using your own name as a freed person, the name that you were assigned. It was just a total rejection of anything that came from people of color. And Darrell Lawrence Wellington in 2008 wrote a wonderful article called History, Amnesia, and the N-word. And he comments about the word's power. A subject is small, he says, a word. He states, yet the subject contained within the subject is immeasurable. racism American style. And I'm being very candid with you. I'm usually a little bit more candid, I think. I don't know, my colleagues will tell me when I'm talking to an American audience, because I can shame them better. So Jabari Assam's book that is very, very popular now, The N-Word, Who Can Say It, Who Shouldn't, and Why. And Jabari asked us to examine American racism, particularly racism against Black Americans, through the lens of a single word. If we have a word, folks, that will trace back to history of racism in America. A word. So I have this video, fingers crossed. Oh, we already put it up, didn't we? So I only have to, I forgot what you told me to do. Okay. Oh, guess what? It's not there.
I think it's behind your PowerPoint
There
slide.
it is. There it is. Yeah. Thank you.
They want you to live in a free zone.
I'm telling you,
See it.
it's not a home. Not if you can't say it's not.
That's
That's what I'm saying.
They keep taking.
I think no, trust, I got this. Trust me, trust. So, as a African American,
Josh,
yes.
you do not have to say African American. Just say black.
Oh, good.
Oh, no, we can't.
No, word I meant colored.
What's happening?
No, I just.
Okay, Mr. Stevens, that word is offensive and reminiscent of a not so great time in American history. So let's all just take it down a notch. Maybe reholster our firearms. Charles?
In that case, maybe someone should tell that to the NAACP.
In the first place.
Well, this is actually the second
Where
video
did
I was
Jack
gonna
get an
show.
idea to say a word like that in the first place? What?
Get down, girl. Go ahead, get down. My favorite song, and we play it every day on the way to school. Damn it, it's his birthright. Jewish kids get to go to Israel. Black kids get to say this.
Trey, that is ridiculous. Nobody should say it. It is an ugly, hateful word with an even uglier and hate-filled history.
Yeah, of it being said to us, not by us.
As usual, son, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. That is not a word that Black folks need to be using, ever.
No.
You see, I never use it.
What?
You act like these lights around here gonna pay for themselves.
Okay,
Perfect.
so that video is for a later discussion when we talk about generational differences. So keep it in mind. But the first is, you could hear the first video, and I apologize, I'm not sure, we will put the link in the chat for you, was about an office environment, and that had to do with who can use the word. And so we'll come back to that discussion too. I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Pryor, who's assistant professor of history at Smith College and the daughter of the late Richard Pryor. And she has an extensive article about the etymology of this word, resistance, language, and the politics of freedom in the antebellum North. And you'll find that most of the writings that we have from the Black intelligentsia is usually from the North, the antebellum North, as that's where the hub of learning was at the time. And so we have the Philadelphia group, the Philadelphia activists that were very active, and we have New York, Connecticut, and you read about these northern states. And one would think that if they're free, they're in the North, what could happen? Well, she talks about how traveling while Black was a very, very precarious situation for people of color. And so Easton, who was a minister in Connecticut, he painted a picture of this urban landscape in which these little children, he called them little urchins of Christian villagers, pestered Black men and women as they walked by. White adults often encouraged or joined in with the verbal assault. So just imagine you're walking out of your house, maybe just running your errands, going to work, and you have to be constantly bombarded with the assault of this word, and to have adults nearby encouraging children to continue to do this. So in the antebellum United States, colored travelers were acutely aware that the travel at home, not in their houses, but streets and towns and cities where they visited, was fundamentally inhospitable. Going out in public meant confronting the verbal assault of the N-word. This single word captured the magnitude of anti-Black feelings and was unleashed upon free people as they moved from urban space, rode public vehicles, and even ventured abroad. So imagine going to the store to get bread and milk, and you're actually putting your life at risk just to walk the streets. And these are northern towns. These are not, as we stereotypically believe, the deep South where all this prejudice existed. This is in the antebellum North. So we're going to categorize this word now as a racial microaggression. And early conditioning where parents would share with white children, according to Dr. Pryor, with stories of an N-word boogeyman. N-word boogeyman is coming to get you. And promise that a child will have no more credit than blank if she missed or he misbehaved. Children observed these racial lessons and reacted with open hostility when they saw real Black people. So this is just part of the early conditioning. When we talk about a historical passing the torch and having people learn how to be racist as children. So as Jose Easton, who was Reverend Easton, who wrote about the traveling situation with people of color, David Walker, Frederick Douglass, J.C. Pennington, William Wells Brown, and Harriet Jacob. You're probably most familiar with Frederick Douglass. And they did use the N-word, and there's critics who talk about this quite frequently. How could these learned people have used the words? Well, they used the words expose and protest the complex relationship that they had with this place called America, their home. And so they use this word to really highlight the way a word could be used to oppress an entire group of people and use it as an identifier. So the etymology of the word from descriptor to epithet shows how and why Black activists designated it a verbal symbol of US racial oppression, repression, oppression, even as African laborers continue to use it. So I liken that as today, when you have a lot of people who still use the N-word and they use it in different contexts. And so Jabari supports this, and he offers a blow-by-blow account of the N-word's malfeasance. His book is an account of social anomalies and use of the word within the Black community, which Assam is saying there's nothing new. Blacks have always used this word and continue to use it. He quotes an editorial in the Freedmen's Journal, the nation's first Black newspaper, circa the mid-1800s and the late 1800s is when all of this Black intellectual activity was really, really coming to arise. And he lamenting the adoption of racist epithets by Blacks. So here we are in 2021 in America having these same debates about whether or not this word should be used. And we see that, as Jabari says to us, it is nothing new. The N-word became virulent, precise precision because of Black laborers. Let me explain this. Black laborers that I am talking about were the domestic workers, Blacks who worked in restaurants, in hotels, on the docks. And I guess that it would be equivalent to what we call blue collar workers. And so the Black laborers of the time integrated it into their language. And it's a much, Dr. Pryor says, it's a much understudied and overlooked aspect of African-American history. In other words, the label carried so much discursive weight because Black laborers spoke it, self-identified as such, and by doing so, subverted notions of race and class identified in the United States. So you have this group of Black activists preaching to the masses or the laborers not to use this word, and the laborers are somewhat resentful and rebellious, and they continue to use the word. and much to the chagrin of the Black activists who still use the word themselves, but pretended that they use it for political reasons. So as more Blacks adopted the words, and remember, more whites are around the blue collar workers or the laborers than they are around the Black intellects or activists. And so they're hearing this word very frequently used as Blacks are working the docks and working some of these low level jobs that they are forced to work in. And so as more Blacks adopted the word, the whites began to disown the word and claim that it was a word used for and by Blacks to describe themselves. In turn, whites disavowed the word's traceable European origins, and by 1820s, largely used it to mark Black speech. They placed the onus on Black subordination on Black themselves, using African-American vernacular to make inequity appear both logical and natural. Sorry. So power, guilty or innocent, one of the biggest problems in running this word is that for decades now, there have existed two N-words. One, people claim, two that end in ER and one that ends in A. For many, they have distinctly different meanings. The ER version is linked to the words hateful, racist origins, and the other more of a term of endearment. But I don't think it's quite that simple. And Assam agrees with me. There are those who argue that the versions are not so much distinct words than they are different pronunciations of the same word with the same vile underpinnings. Changing a vowel or two doesn't change the meaning. And then we have those who say, we have reappropriated this word. Well, racial slurs as the N-words are sometimes adopted by the group that they once meant to insult, a phenomenon known as reappropriation. We see it in the gay community. They have reappropriated some of their slurs. And I always have a debate about why that worked for them and it doesn't work for the N-word. So to harness power of the N-word, target groups tried reclamation of these slurs. Instead of using the term derogatively, groups can self-identify, use the term affiliatively, and potentially subvert the derogatory meaning of the slur. Some say we have arrived. I get in debates all the time with my students, and they claim that they've risen above this word. No matter how our intellects or pop culture icons attempt to coin the use of this word, and no matter how they choose to present it to the masses, the epithet still pierces with the weight of its races and oppression past. And enough time has not yet gone by to erase that. And I apologize for quoting myself. This is written by Dr. Rice and me in 2002. And we have students quoting it in their papers for their dissertation like it was just written yesterday. All racial slurs can be incredibly negative for people belonging to marginalized groups, and their usage should not be taken lightly. And this I say in response to some of my white students who believe because it's in hip hop and it's in music, that it's okay for them to sing along with the song and to use the N-word when it comes up. So what I'd like you to do now, if you don't mind, if you will indulge me, is could you take a few minutes and in the chat, give some thought first. Close your eyes if you have to. And think about a time when you first heard the word. What is your earliest recognition of hearing this word? And then, if you can, be in touch with your affect. Tell me how it made you feel. And it's perfectly all right if you didn't have a feeling about it, but if you did, really appreciate if you could share that.
I'll read the chat as they slowly come in.
Okay. This one's a little harder than the first one.
But so far we have some people have heard it in a child's rhyme and they didn't know what it meant. Some people heard it during their grade 10 English class when they read To Kill a Mockingbird and it made them feel uncomfortable. Some people saw it used as a slur by other people or other children in the playground. They felt that it was humiliating and degrading. Many others heard it in a song, but they didn't know what it meant. A lot of people see it in popular media.
Okay. So, and we saw how many movies have this word contained in it. So I could see why a lot of your experience would have been through the cinema. People of color, I would bet that 90% of the people of color on this call can remember the first time they heard it and can remember how it made them feel. The N-word's familiarity has outlived that of other racial epithets, once commonplace. It so sums up the essence of the racial stereotype that it can be used as a slur against any group being portrayed as lazy, shiftless, and stupid, including, by the way, white Americans. But guess what? It doesn't land hard with this group. Whites are not tied to this epithet the same way that Black people are. And it's really interesting to see when people argue like, no, I called them the N-word, but I'm not saying it from a racial standpoint. I'm saying it because they're acting like it. It's lazy, shiftless, and stupid, without realizing that that is the problem, that we can have this word attributed to other groups, and it still means what it meant when it was aimed at people of color. So Essam says, for most of the history of our fair republic, the N-word has been at the center of our most volatile exchanges, to the degree that no discussion of American race relations can be complete without it. That's a word. That's a powerful word. You can't have a dialogue on race without that word coming to play. Can't see. So I'm still having a problem with seeing the slides. So let's look at the socioeconomic impact of this word. The word still possesses its power to rend. Wielded indelicately, it can destroy careers and reputations. To be ignorant of the word's meaning and its effect is to make someone vulnerable to all manners of perils, including the loss of jobs, reputation, a friend, even one's life. History is full of one-line utterance that prove to have dire consequences for a number of people. If you can think of celebrities, politicians, or anyone who said something using the N-word and it just completely disrupted their career. The first person I thought about was the guy on Seinfeld, the comedic on Seinfeld. I can't remember his name, but he was in a comedy club, and apparently two Black people were harassing him like people sometimes do, and he called them the N-word repeatedly, and he hasn't recovered his career. And I always thought Kramer was pretty funny on the Seinfeld show, but now he has this bad rap because he chose to use a word that is not appropriated for his use in his defense of himself being attacked while he's on stage. So again, being ignorant of the effect of this word and how it can change your life, not a good idea. So I say this, and hopefully we get further, you'll see, I say this so that we can be clear that this word does have power. And as much as we try to get away from it and try to diffuse it, it just seems to grow like an amoeba. It just continues to grow. So what does that mean for us as in the academy? what other words in the English language carries the power of the N word? And I wish somebody would chat and tell me which ones do, because I've been looking for them. Just the mere utterance of this word brings an enormous weight of 400 years of oppression and violence into our present life. Nevertheless, faculty in higher education embrace the freedom of speech as an edict to defend the use of this powerful racial epithet. I have a little bit. You know, the problem is I want to see people and I can't see people and still see my slides. And that's the problem. And many professors say using a full word is unnecessary for students to understand its meaning and impact. And others loudly protest, saying not using it in a literary, legal, and other contexts is a form of censorship. So that's our current arguments. So I have taboo to vogue. So let's look at why it may also carry so much power. So you know how when you tell young folks don't do something or you make a taboo, you actually are inviting them, because that is going to make it more attractive to them. And so we have this word moving from taboo to vogue, and it waxes and wanes in its popularity over the last couple of decades. And I quoted our article again, that it waxes and wanes its vogue status, but too much of the older generation, its connotation remains dangerous. For us, it's very dangerous. And to the young, it proves dangerously fashionable. And I say all the time to my students, you're using that word because you don't understand what's behind that word. You don't have a historical perspective. And in my program, we have a residential program for students. They live on campus. The word is treated like profanity. So if you're caught saying it or using it, I don't care in what way, you have to go to the student court and defend your use of it. And in the meantime, you're going to have to read articles that give you a background of this word. So that then if you choose to use the word under the edict of free speech, then you're doing it so in an educated form. But when you're ignorant about it, educate yourself and then make a decision. So, excuse me. So many professors say using the words unnecessary. And I read that one already. Sorry. So the M word, so commercialization of the word. So you have the word profit equals value. So we're looking at a capitalistic a perspective on this now. So when you look at the rap and hip hop industry, and let me say the publications, the majority of the publications that I've seen that use the N word in their title or for the title, they're really trying to sell more books. Because when you read, inside the book, you realize they had other options, but they chose to use this word because they wanted this shock value and the publishers wanted to sell more books. So the more books you sell, the more the word has power. So let's look at some of the reasons that we hear this word so much in the hip hop language. Aubrey Drake, Canada's own. Graham is a Canadian rapper, singer, and songwriter and actor from Toronto. As of 2021, Drake's net worth is estimated at $180 million, making him one of the richest rappers in the world. Now, he currently, excuse me, he's currently signed, to Lil Wayne's company. And Lil Wayne is another well-known rapper, for those of you who may not be familiar. So now you have Black hip hop artists, very successful Black hip hop artists, choosing to be with Black record companies and record producers. And so now you have this bubble that is containing the use of this word and other extreme language because it's popular and it sells. And in America, if it sells, it has value. Sean, I love Jay-Z, Sean Corey Carter, not exactly a badass name for a rapper. He is now our first hip hop billionaire. And Forbes estimates his worth at 1 billion or 890 million pounds. You've heard of his wife, Beyonce? She actually is estimated, her net worth is estimated at 355 million as of June 2019, and I'm sure that's gone up. So what do you say, folks? That's a lot of money. So we have these attempts to rid ourselves of this word, but the reality of the situation is, as long as it's profitable, that may be a little difficult. The word is too essential part of the urban slang, and so the NAACP chose to have a mock funeral in 2007 to put this word in a casket and literally bury it. The same year, the New York City Council attempted a symbolic resolution banning the word from New York City. Well, you can imagine how well that went over. And now we have our NBA and our NFL signing in and attempting to ban the word. It'll prove, they said it will prove, it is too complex and nuanced to be policed by football referees. Can you imagine them throwing a yellow penalty flag on a play, use of the N-word? It's not going to be possible. And also the players have big problems with being censored when they're playing. They're saying they're playing each other, they're moving forward. They said that word's going to come out because it's been such a part of our life. And that's how we relate to it. Bam, I got you. So, and then there's that view of all these white NFL executives dictating language rules to a majority Black player pool. So we have these attempts to educate people and make this word go away. And it's hilarious to me because the reason this word exists is because we're still steeped in a racist culture. So why do young people use it? Because we have generational differences, folks, in all kinds of ways: clothing, food, entertainment. But this generation has almost no personal connection to the civil rights struggle. They often don't equate the word, at least not exclusively, to racism the way some of the older generations do. I have a friend who has a mother who's 101 years old. She's on this call now, and she has a different reaction to a number of things. But what she did have was a wonderful reaction when she saw her first Black president elected and moved into office. She hates when her daughter takes her to hairdressers because she's used to going to Black hairdressers. She's not used to going there. So big, and oh, with Carolyn, we can't go here. They're white. And so she's adorable, and I just love her. But she does come from a time when it was unsafe to go and interact at that level. And I'm not talking about the Deep South. I'm talking about the North. And so the younger generation, even though they benefit from the civil rights movement, they didn't live in it. Many of their parents as well didn't go through Jim Crow. That's when I know I'm really gotten older, because their parents haven't gone through Jim Crow laws and haven't dealt with discriminatory avert policies, I'll say it like that. Therefore, they choose to raise their children differently. They want their children, they say, to be free. They want them to be free from the burden of this thing called race, this burden of this thing called the N-word. They don't want it to have power. And so they say, let it go. Just let it go. It's over. But we all know that's not true. And so that was the video you saw, where you saw the wife arguing with the husband about allowing the son to use the word. And then the older person, you had 3 generations in that household, he says, I never use it. And people have false memories about the use of this word as they get older. But the truth of the matter is, it would be very difficult to exist in this country without hearing, or at some point in time, I haven't met anyone that said they never used it. I mean, I have met someone that said they never used it, but I've never met someone said that they did not have it used against them. So, who owns the word? The N-word does and always will be owned by the dominant culture. Excuse me. So to suggest that Black people can control or banish it from their vocabulary is naive thinking at best. For scholars to suggest that the N-word belongs to African Americans and that it is pliable, malleable to our want need, they're dressing it up, taking it out, and owning it, is to marry themselves to the contemporary pillars of racism that we so desperately want to make obsolete. The word is now being policed, Dr. Pryor says, because Black folks didn't have a choice in the matter at certain times in their life, and it was used to their disadvantage and to abuse and degrade them and reinforce the sense that Black people were inferior. So now the word survives as a redemption of act of Black folks. The word survives in the conditions that Black folks have inscribed for its use. No one can take that, and it becomes violent when other people attempt to do that. But they don't own the word. And none of this is new. It still divides even communities within the African American communities, even within families, as you saw from the video clip. So academic freedom versus self-esteem is my heading on this, because when I read in the literature and when I read the research, the literature, journalism, communication professors, and some others argue that the necessity of using the N-word is important to preserve the artist's intent to be authentic in the classroom. Many critics say destroying history or erasing events all because of this word. Why are you giving this word so many power? It's that when statues of Confederates deck the capitals of most southern states, students are exposed to that on a daily basis, going past these Confederate monuments to the South and having to pay homage to it indirectly or subconsciously, because it is there as a monument to a so-called hero. And Black students said that they're just not going to continue to tolerate these monuments to racism. And so you have this uprising, which is brought really closer to home by this whole Black Lives Matters movement, that people who normally would not be able to participate or be allies or in allyship positions have been able to do that. There are a couple of theories about that. We're closed up. People who normally don't have their rights impeded upon are now feeling what it's like not to have freedom. And these are very benevolent causes to go out and say, it sounds really, really good, and it makes us feel really good. It's egocentric to say that we're out here working for justice and we're working for inequality. So I say, hooray, keep it up. We know that self-esteem is a positive correlate to academic achievement, and self-esteem in the classroom is supported by the language that's used. So what happens to students of color when they're exposed to the N-word in class? Are we saying that student well-being versus freedom of speech are not compatible concepts? Which do we choose, the student's well-being or the integrity of the concept that we're protecting? Well, there is a psychological impact on students, particularly students of color and white students as well. Regardless of the intent of the owner, I think we'll agree that most agree that the N-word is fundamentally derogatory. The epitome of an offensive racial slur. Most would agree, I hope, that it is irresponsible to spin the N-word as merely a political term without reference to the psychological damage it continues to wield when uttered. And most would agree that it is irresponsible then, especially within the context of higher education, to employ its use while discounting its historical significance. So what happens when you hear the racial slur in the classroom? Teachers usually panic or minimize its impact. Now. Students of color and allies get angry, and under that anger is hurt, oftentimes when you unpack it. Administrators move to silence the controversy. Whoever said it might get booted out the door, controversy over. No, why are you blaming the person that is a product of the culture that supports this, that the culture that they brought up? So would it not be better to have a dialogue? But then as an administrator in a university, I also know the pressure that comes and the fact that as an administrator, you've got to be really concerned with your institution's reputation and whether or not you're going to have FTEs still coming in to take your classes and to enroll in your university. It also erodes the trust between teachers and students. It's ruptured. Students feel the teacher didn't protect them. And oftentimes teachers feel that Black students are being so sensitive. Why are you being so sensitive? Wow, it's not that heavy. And the N word comes with a rich history that's connected to our encounters with this word. So each student that sits in front of you, whether white or Black, but especially students of color, they come with a host of encounters with this word. So when they hear it in the classroom, it is so disruptive for them. And you may not know it because some will pretend that it's okay. I've seen one student like this. Said, oh, he's just not tuned in. He's just not tuned in. He's tuned you out because he heard this too many times. My students say when it's spoken in class without discussion and context, it poisons the environment. And if you've been a part of this at any time in your life, you can't negate the fact that the room changes. The air in the room goes out. And what comes in is a barrage of feelings and anxiety and disruptive emotions. And my students tell me that they feel that these microaggressions are hurtful. And more importantly, it moves them from learner to defender. They have come to class, they have enrolled in these classes to learn something. And instead now, when this word enters and it's not managed effectively, they're now in a position of defending themselves in class, whether it's conscious or unconscious, whether it's blatant, overt, or covert, that is taking away energy, psychic energy, and it also affects their cognition. So we have to look at microaggressions, and Dr. Corfu really set this up nicely for us with her presentation, her amazing presentation on racism last week. And she talked about microaggressions. And we want to add to that. So microaggressions are those brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, environmental indignities, whether intentional or intentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative gender, racial, sexual orientation, and religious slights and insults to the target person or group. So then you have this added factor of racial migration or race-related racism. And so Chester Pierce coined this in the 70s, to refer to everyday and often automatic put downs and insults directed toward Black Americans. And surprisingly or not, depending on your position, perpetrators usually aren't aware that they have engaged in an exchange that demeans the recipient of the communication. So you can see how dialoguing might be very important in order for people to not continue to engage in these behaviors, because oftentimes they're not aware that they've insulted you or insulted the person. In psychological literature, microaggressions fulfill the criteria for being a stressor. And normal life stressors are experienced by everyone. And then people of color must add this experience of race-related stress onto the regular stressors that everyone else endures. So for many young American males, especially, I pick males because I'm a mother of a Black son, they're under severe continuing stress. They're exposed to constant microaggressions, feel powerless to do anything about it, end up suppressing their internal racial rage, and is tired and exhausted by the constant racial bombardments directed at them due to increased stereotypes. My son has stories about being followed around the store, and then he makes a game of it and just keeps walking around just to frustrate the employees because he's learned over the years, and that is his maladaptive way of coping or fighting back toward this energy that is so pervasive. And he has had a rich multicultural life, and so I always am amazed at the fact of what he picks up in the environment in terms of racial related stress. And would talk to his math teacher about possible problems and tell a teacher that they were biased. I'm like, pass math first before you bring up that level of controversy in your math class. But nevertheless, he did. So I bring up Black males because they are what we consider an endangered group. So when, and I hear all the time people say, well, they're just microaggressions. You just shake it off and get on. And they're not as harmful as the major aggressions like rape and hate crimes. And, they're benign. Well, the cumulative effect is not benign. And you don't have to have a major stressor or crisis proportion to feel the effects of these stresses. And so by analyzing these studies on microaggressions, we find that even small demands on people in the form of daily life hassles produce high levels of stress. Now, taking exams, trying to decide on a major, and sitting through boring classes generates stress for all students. Now, students of color, you add the racial microaggressions, and now the campus and negotiating the campus climate, and now the stress levels intensify. Racial migrations represent major stresses for marginalized groups. Racial migrations can cause physiological distress. Your immune system is affected, susceptibility to diseases, decreased subject well-being, and life satisfaction. Increased anxiety, depression, and all forms of mental disorder by Sue's work on microaggressions. And the book is in the reference list at the end. So there's a lot of talk about academia just dropping the N-word from all college classes, that no one should be allowed to use it. And so my recommendations and some of the research say institutions can please consider developing guidelines to address the main objections to dropping the N-word. And this is necessary before you set up guidelines for the responsible use of the word in classrooms. And please, when you do that, include students in the discussion before the word is sanctioned for use in the class or before the word is removed from the class. Reconsider allowing its use for shock value when discussing the past injustices, because you're forgetting that it is still people of color's present reality. So it happened a long time ago. No, it's happening to us every day. And remember, more importantly, classrooms are supposed to be a safe place, safe place for students, for all students. So what is the psychological impact? Again, students switch majors and drop classes because of this word. And this is an issue of teaching, not of free speech. Because if you are prepared for these discussions, and if you've prepared yourself for these discussions in terms of evaluating self, then I think it's an easier time in class to model vulnerability for students and also to help students problem solve and negotiate this troublesome speech. Because students say they want to learn about James Baldwin, William Faulkner, and civil rights era, but in a safe space. For Black students, this word is embedded in every aspect of their lives, in pop culture, TV, movies, on social media, video games, etc. However, when spoken by white people, can have devastating effects. So you'll hear students sing it, talk it, say it to each other, and then a white person says it. The whole climate changes. This 6-letter word, folks, changes students' lives. And change. So educate powerful, effective classroom dialogues. Educators should explore their own biases and prejudice. These are some suggestions or some techniques and some skills that need to be developed or looked at in order to have effective classroom dialogues. Your own biases and prejudices. I love when my beginning psych class students come in and we get on the chapter of conditioning and prejudice and discrimination, and I'll say, how many in this room believe that they're prejudiced? And guess what happens? No hands go up. And then we do the whole chapter, and at the end of the class, I'll say, now who believes that they have prejudices? And most of their hands go up. Because it is not something that's ever present on their minds. And particularly students of color really believe that there's no way they can be prejudiced. So also confront your own fears and apprehensions. Actively develop the awareness, knowledge, and skills to successfully facilitate different racial dialogues. And this is something that should be a part of staff development for our faculty, staff, and our students. And I know a lot of universities are doing this, but I challenge them to do it as a regular part of their educating and orientation of new faculty, of their education and orientating of new students, and really getting this multicultural and diversity and inclusion language into our everyday lives and into our curriculums. So those here, effective classroom, what they should explore, what teachers we should explore. I keep making myself not in the population, which is not good. I know this is getting long, we're almost done. So we have to possess a working definition and understanding of racial migration, microaggressions and difficult dialogues. Understand self as a racial culture being by making the visible invisible. So Freud always says that dreams are not the reality, they're a manifestation or nor a manifestation of your unconscious, but they are merely invisible entities. So make them visible. Ask yourself these tough questions. Intellectually acknowledge one's own cultural conditioning and biases. We've all been conditioned to believe certain things and to have biases. And we did a test on, you ever done the implicit bias test? And all the Black people thought they would just come up with no biases. And many of us came up with the most biases. So that was really a teachable moment for us all. Emotional comfort in dealing with race and racism. It is a difficult discussion. And the more we shy away from it, the more we cheat ourselves of a rich relationship. Because once you can have emotional comfort with dealing with race and racism and having these difficult conversations, your world opens up and people are better bonded, if that's the word, and more engaged, and your life is more enriched. That's what diversity is all about. But we grow up, and many white people don't have a language to discuss racism because when they were young and they said something, they were shushed. Oh, don't say that. Sue in his book has an example of a young a toddler who looks at the TV and says, oh, I don't like her skin. I don't like her dark skin. And I guess her babysitter was there who's a person of color and the white mother. And oh my God, don't say that. Oh, because the fear that you are raising a race is greater than your fear of needing to understand why the child said that. And so on closer examination, if we allow young people and students to say why they're feeling a certain way, we may be able to comprehend this gap and this divide a little better and do something to address it. So perhaps the skin issue might have had to do with she had hot chocolate that morning that burnt her tongue, or that there was a child in the daycare that had skin like that, we don't know because we don't ask the question. And that's what happens in the classroom often. It'll come up, it gets heated, and as professors, God forbid, we want to lose control of our classrooms. So we okay, everyone has said what they need to say, let's stop now. No, let's provide an opportunity, a ground that's rich for growing these discussions. But we can only do that if we've got comfort ourselves. And also to understand what makes sense of our own and makes sense of our own emotions. You're going to have some feelings about these things, and not to run away from them because they are natural, they are normal. And we have to begin to show our own vulnerability with our students and just say, you know, this isn't so comfortable for me. And I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And you can model for your students that discomfort and be in that vulnerable state, which will allow them to have a model that they can follow. And control the process, not the content. So you have two classmates debating, and the conversation gets hot. And then the professor goes, okay, now the conversation seems to have reached an impasse. And so the professor is somewhat relieved. And they said, okay, well, let's go on, let's move on. And what were you saying? I don't understand what you were saying. It's not the content, it's the process. So ask students how they feel when these things happen. Don't just cut them off and go into a cloak of silence. Ask them how they feel. Mary, how do you feel when John said he agreed with you? So, and this comes up often, like when you say, Black students will say, I'm so oppressed and I feel horrible. And then maybe a white student will say, well, I'm a white woman, I'm oppressed too. So then they get into this big thing of being oppressed. No. So John, do you think Mary's, yes, I know women are oppressed in society and our culture, but I'm talking about Black people. So then you're you're controlling the process, not the content, because it's rarely about the content. The content is the springboard, but the process is what allows us to get through it and feel better about ourselves and better about our classmates and better about our colleagues, because we've had this dialogue and we now understand where people are coming from as opposed to writing our own scripts about it. And there are two more, and I promise you, I'll be done. Am I doing okay with time? No. Okay. So thank you. So don't be passive and allow the dialogue to bring over the silence. We talked about that. And more importantly, when things like this happen in a classroom, thank the students for participating, because they could easily just cut it off, go out, be angry, be mad, drop your course, never come back, never hear from it. So we're in a unique position to help students be better about this, but we have to be, as I said, better about it ourselves. Education holds one of the primary keys to combating and overcoming this harm delivered to people of color and other marginalized groups. Unfortunately, few of us as educators are sufficiently trained in anti-racism strategies. But as you know, with the murders and the Black Lives Matter outrage, this is not going away, folks. And the Trump era for us in the United States has done nothing but bring more white supremacy to the front. It was not cool in the 70s to be racist. In the Trump era, it wasn't called racism, it's called Make America Great Again. We still understand that that's code for white supremacy. White women, suburban white women, love me. I saved your neighborhoods. From who, dude? Who'd you save them from? I live in the neighborhood, my neighbor. So all of those messages were sent out and has brought to the surface this resurgence of white supremacy. And when we looked at what happened on January 6th, and we juxtaposed the amount of preparation that went into Black Lives Matter March as opposed to the January 6th that they're calling insurrection, it was minimum. The mayor of Washington, D.C. asked for the National Guard to be on standby. They did not activate the National Guard until 2 o'clock on the afternoon of the 6th. If that had been a group of people of color, not only would they not have been activated, they would have been there waiting for them the way they were when Black Lives Matter. And you can go on CNN and see the pictures. They have juxtaposed them. Well, I don't know. I'm assuming you all have the same CNN. That's not. There goes my ethnocentricity. So it's just so blatant and it's so egregious right now. So we as educators, we have a unique opportunity to educate ourselves and then educate our future leaders. And I think I just have, at the core, the word has been about power that's held over Blacks for a century. And we can't reclaim it, rename it, or argue and say that it doesn't sting. It always stings. Maya Angelou did a wonderful analogy when she said, when I see a bottle and it says POISON, then I know what's in the bottle. The bottle is nothing, but the content is poison. If I pour it into a Bavarian crystal or Waterford crystal, it's still poison. So no matter how we package this, it's still poison, folks. And so a friend of mine, Patricia Wilson, I had to put her in here because she's very vocal about these things, and she works as a television producer in LA. And she says, when Black people say, well, you hear it in the rap music, when non-Black people say, you hear it in rap music, is it okay for others to use? And there's a lot of debate going on about that as well. And the answer is, hell no, it's not okay. I don't think it ever will be okay, she says, because when others use it, it's more dehumanizing. And they don't take on the historical responsibility. So she says, you can check anybody anytime and say, heck no, it's not okay to use that word. I don't care who you heard using it. So food for thought. Beyond the social unrest of this spring, summer, winter, and hopefully I won't have to keep going and put next spring in here for my next presentation, we now live in a culturally volatile times, which is more reason than ever to equip participants for mutually respectful conversation that avoids shaming battles in class. Students like faculty members have their own legal right to free speech and to speak out in class, but they also have a choice to employ civil and empathetic practices. Guidelines written to encourage participants to choose such practices will benefit both instructors and students. This can be taught. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.